Hello, this is a presentation for Alaska Airlines for Management 590 Spring 2020 WCU EMBA. This presentation is done by George Aguiar and Prasanna Surakanti. In this presentation, we will cover multiple items around the aerospace industry and Alaska Airlines. We will first discuss Alaska Airlines as a whole, who they are as a company, and what are some of the things that make them who they are. From there, we will go into an analysis that we have performed around the aerospace industry and how Alaska Airlines fits into those things. Third, we're going to discuss the competition. Which airlines are the ones that Alaska Airlines needs to be aware of and looking out for? And what are some of the things that make those airlines different and more attractive than Alaska Airlines? And lastly, we will cover some of the key things that we see that are impacting the aerospace industry and specifically Alaska Airlines. From there, we will present some of the recommendations that we have to make Alaska more successful. As we look at the demographic that Alaska Airlines focuses on, what we see is that they have a large number of frequent travelers, like business people. It's mainly middle class and upper middle class, and the reason that we see this is because they are not the lowest cost carrier out there. They have competition that's even lower, but Alaska has been able to really focus on the business people that are looking for quick flights and traveling to specific locations like Los Angeles, Portland, and some of those areas where you can go and come on the same day. Now, when we look at the growth area, which areas of the country that they're focusing on, they are a well-known Western United States airline. And that's really what they focused a lot on. Now, even though Alaska Airlines focused a lot on the Western states, they did expand their region into Mexico and Russia, as we had mentioned earlier. In 2016, they did merge with Virgin America, which expanded their presence in another state with regards to being known as a California airline. Alaska Airlines has been known mainly to be a Seattle-based airline, so the merger with Virgin expanded that opportunity for them. Virgin also included additional flights into the East Coast, which helped Alaska. Alaska Airlines has been a very active airline in focusing on technological advancements, not just for the plane, but for the user as a traveler. They were one of the first ones to adopt the airline to landing using GPS. They were the first with web check-in, which is something very important as a traveler. They've also have a very good mobile app, which one can use your mobile boarding pass, so that way you are able to save time when going through the lines. You don't have to actually go to the ticket stand and get a boarding pass. They've also developed a self-bag tagging, so if you do need to check in anything, you just go to one of their kiosks and do your self-check-in, and it will print out your bag tags. So it saves a lot of time when one is trying to get through the airport. They've also added things like biometric fingerprint access to their airport lounge. So technologically, they are doing a lot of good things for the customer and also for the airplane. They are also investing in the 737 MAX, which is one of the highest technologically single aisle airplanes in today's aerospace market. As we look at Alaska's global segment, they have been working closely to develop a very good list of global partners. dealing with airlines like Korean Air, Japan Airlines, Qantas, Iceland Air, and Singapore Airlines are some of the flagship carriers that they have been working with to allow passengers to utilize their mileage plans to travel to different parts of the world. Now, Alaska is a well-known airline for their loyalty program, and many airlines are starting to devalue those frequent flyer programs, but actually Alaska Airlines is doing a great job, and theirs keeps getting better. Along with that, they have nearly tripled the mileage plan member accruals over the last 3 years. So it is a very good growth for them overall. They're technically not part of any alliance quite yet, but they are working on joining the One World Alliance, which will help them diversify even more into other parts of the globe as they move forward. Now that we've finished talking about the global segment, we are going to transition over to discuss the aerospace industry and how Alaska fits within that. So the aerospace industry currently consists of 59 carriers just in the United States. Of the 59, we have 18 major carriers, of which Alaska Airlines is one of them. There's a total of 41 smaller carriers that exist today. Those numbers in the past years have actually been decreasing, more on the smaller carrier side than on the major carriers, but still, there's consolidation happening within the overall aerospace market. As we look at the commercial airplane business, we start to look at things, for example, the bargaining power of the buyers. Now, in our analysis, what we did is we believe this to be from a medium to a high, meaning that the buyers can quickly and easily switch from one carrier. So if we think about when somebody is planning a vacation, they will typically use some sort of online web search. So you have like your Expedias, or you can actually go directly to the airline of choice. Now, most passengers will go and select their airline based on the price. So they are the ones that typically have more of the bargaining power than what the airline would. Yes, the airline can offer them certain things, for example, points or upgrades, things like that. But the buyer is the one that actually can select where they go, and it's very quick for them just to pick somebody else. So from a loyalty perspective, there isn't a very high loyalty to each one of the airlines. Now, if we transition from the buyers to suppliers, this is also one in which typically the supplier is the one that tends to have the higher leverage over the airline. There's only a select number of fuel suppliers that you can go to. There's actually only 2 major OEMs for the actual aircraft you can go to. The skilled labor workforce is also one that there's at times limited individuals that you could pick. So again, from a bargaining power, the airline only has so much. So in this scenario, the suppliers actually have a higher bargaining power than the airlines would. Then we look at things like the threats of the new entrants into the commercial aviation. The threat of new entrants is actually quite low when we look at historically how many new airlines have come in and actually stayed around for a long period of time. And why is this? Now, when we look at the required investment, it's actually a very high investment when you think about having to go and either lease or purchase a new aircraft. Along with that, you have a need for a very skilled and knowledgeable employees that know how to actually work in the commercial aviation business. Then one must be able to meet all the government regulations, and depending on where the airline chooses to fly, that can be numerous. If you're going to fly domestically, then you would mainly deal with the FAA. If you're going to start flying into Europe, you'll be dealing with those regulators, and also Canada and every country that one picks. So it's not the easiest thing to do. And along with that, as a new airline, you must be ready for a long road to gain popularity and for customers to pick you. One of the most important things that a lot of customers are looking at is the safety record of a lot of the airlines. If you don't have a safety record, then you are risking not being selected as the airline of choice. So yeah, it takes time for one to build trust with the passengers, and also for word to get out that the airline is good with regards to the interior, on time, performance, and so forth. Along with the threat of new entrants, the commercial aerospace also has to deal with the threat of substitute products. Now, when you think about an airplane, there are lots of substitutes for people to travel. There's a train system, there's a bus, car, ship, and other transports. And the switching cost is actually fairly low. So if you're looking for a method to get from Seattle to Los Angeles, there are numerous ways to do it. The main thing that people mainly look at is the speed of how they can get there, the luxury if they want to go first class or so forth, and also what is the cost of each one. And in this type of scenario, the main thing you're looking at, cost to most people is also equated not just from a money perspective, but also from a time. So an airline must be ready to compete with each one of these things as they're looking to grow. From there, we start looking at the Interfirm Rivalry. So this really talks about the 59 airlines that I had mentioned earlier, and the rivalry that they have amongst each other. Because it is a very mature industry, there is an intense rivalry. You have airlines, for example, Delta versus Alaska. Those airlines are truly competing on price structure, the convenience, and things that they offer. For example, does one have a lounge in a specific airport versus another? So that rivalry exists all the time. And then you will also have specific airlines that group together as part of a partnership and will block another airline from coming in and flying in specific segments. So it's pretty intense. And also the larger fleets tend to have more flights, let's say, per hour versus a smaller fleet. So a large airline like Delta has about 2 to 3 times more aircrafts than Alaska. So they're able to cover a lot more area than Alaska would, and can offer different price structures and so forth for those people that are wanting to go in those areas. Along with that, we also talk about strategy. So when we're looking at what each one of these airlines have as their strategy, one of the key things that drives a lot of it is cost. So one thing that Alaska has from a strategy perspective is they do try to work to have one of the lowest fares. Now, in this slide, what we're seeing here is in comparison to the other major airlines, they are right next to Southwest. Southwest is well known to have their pricing structure is the lowest cost carrier, but they don't offer too many amenities like Alaska would. So when you compare Alaska to like a Delta United, you can see that there's a pretty good difference in price, but those other airlines are substantially larger and offer other services. Now we will be transitioning from the strategy to the resource and capabilities that Alaska Airlines presents. One of the key things that Alaska uses in regards to keeping their costs low is that of selecting a specific OEM as their main carrier. Alaska for a very long time was known to be a Boeing-only fleet, and they have a very large number of 737s. Now with this, they are able to keep their costs low by utilizing mechanics, pilots, and the whole team around that 737, so they know the ins and outs of it. It really helps from a fleet sustainability. They're able to do that. Recently, when they acquired Virgin America, they brought in the Airbus line of airplanes, but Alaska has already stated that they will slowly transition those Airbus airplanes out of service and become a Boeing-only fleet. Now, other things that they bring forward is their performances that they have around on-time, departures, arrivals, just those metrics that are very key to individuals that are traveling. They are consistently getting a lot of awards for their overall performance. They also focus, especially in the Alaska area, on the cargo of the aircraft that they fly. So they are a well-known airline, specifically in the Alaska region, that is able to carry cargo to multiple areas within that state. Now that we've seen the resources and capabilities that Alaska Airlines brings with them, we will start to transition into their competition. As we see here on this chart, the domestic market share of the airlines from January to December 2019, we see that Alaska Airlines is fifth. Now, the reason we only focused on the domestic market was due to the fact that Alaska does not have a large presence outside of the U.S. Most of the flights that they do have outside the U.S. are more into Mexico, Canada, and Costa Rica. But other than that, they're not really competing with some of these larger airlines outside of the U.S. So what we could see here is you have the four largest airlines there in front of us. You have the American Airlines, Delta, Southwest, and United, and Alaska's there at about a 6.4% of the total domestic market. So they're not a very large airline in comparison to those other ones. Now, as we start to focus on some of their true competition, we start looking at Delta. They are one of the airlines that does have a base in both Seattle and Los Angeles, which is a direct competition to Alaska. Now, they also do have a very diversified revenue stream. They, along with their commercial side of the business with regards to passenger carry, they also have a diversification into maintenance, repair, and overhaul. So they have facilities that they dedicate to do that type of work and actually do it for other airlines. The one thing about Delta also is that they do have a different system. They have a hub and spoke system, which is different than Alaska's. Delta to Alaska is more of the competition when we look at it, but Alaska does not really present a major competition to Delta just because of the size of the fleets. Delta is about 3 times as large as Alaska when it comes to the number of airplanes. Now, if we look at United Airlines, which is another one of the competitors, they also have a hub and spoke system. So they're very similar to Delta in that manner. So United actually is able to target the Virgin America areas of Alaska's business. They fly very similar routes. And there's even been potential thought that United could be looking at acquiring Virgin America from Alaska based on Alaska's current situation with the 737. And United flies very similar aircraft that Virgin does, which is the Airbus fleet. Now, looking at the strongest competitor coming up, it's Southwest. Southwest is truly Alaska's main competition. They both fly point-to-point service. They both fly 737s. And Southwest, the airline most likely to acquire Alaska. There has been some documents that show that they could be targeting them, but nothing has really come out of it. Now, as we look at Alaska Airlines and some of the key issues that they are facing, what we've found that we've identified three key ones. One is having a large fleet of aircraft from one airplane manufacturer, which is the Boeing company. Number two, they have what's considered the loyalty breakage, which is customers going away from Alaska and not utilizing correctly their mileage points per se. And the third one, which we believe to be the most important problem or issue that Alaska is facing, is that of shortage of commercial pilots. Now, what we did is we wanted to elaborate more on the shortage of commercial pilots because we believe that one to be the most critical one. This is an issue that not just Alaska Airlines is facing, but it's actually a overall airline shortage, but it is one that Alaska must really focus on. The FAA actually performed a study and looked at the number of active pilots. That number has been decreasing for the last 3 decades. So that is a big problem in which this specific job that at one point in time was very lucrative is no longer seen by younger generation as a very lucrative or high-paying job. And along with that, the military is also experiencing a shortage in these pilots. Historically, the commercial airline pilots have been individuals that were highly trained that came out of the military from flying aircraft there. Now with this shortage also impacting the military, the pilots that we have today are not as highly trained as the ones that we used to utilize before. So it is something that Alaska must focus on. They need to make sure that they're working closely with their union to keep their pilots happy. Now, recommendations around the one airplane manufacturer. One of the things that Alaska must look at, and technically has by recently working on the acquisition of Virgin America, is to look at 2 OEMs. So instead of being a Boeing only fleet, they must look at becoming also Airbus. Now, this is a very difficult decision to make because you lose some of the training between the pilots because the airplanes are a little bit different in flying. You lose the mechanics ability to work on both the aircraft, but it is one of the things that they must take into account. Also, from a loyalty breakage, one of the things that they must work on is offering different options for utilizing those loyalty points. So, and as we look at, again, the shortage of commercial pilots, one of the recommendations or a couple of recommendations we came up with was they need to start recruiting early, offering scholarships and things like that for students, working closely with the pilots unions. And even one small thing, too, would be potentially rotate some of the pilots between Alaska and Virgin. They fly different routes, and little things like this might help the airline keep their pilots happy and wanting to continue to work at Alaska. Now, as we look at how we would implement some of these things, what we would recommend is establish a team that would create a schedule for each one of the items, and also do a monthly report out to leadership, and that leadership ensure that they are holding each responsible party accountable, and most importantly, celebrate the successes that come out of each action. So that is our presentation overall. As you've seen, Alaska has grown substantially from where they started in 1933 in Alaska itself, and it is establishing itself as one of the best airlines in the U.S., and they continue to be one of the top rated airlines just based off their performance metrics. So thank you very much.